All right, so we're starting with a little bit of practice and review from what we were doing last week here. So we got 11 boys in the class. We know it's 45% girls. We want to know how many girls are in the class. All right, so the first thing I do is I see that 45% there, and I know I'm going to have to solve it with a proportion because it's more complicated than just multiplying by the percent. So I'm going to start by writing that 45% as a fraction. So 45 over 100. So that's where we start there.
Well, that's like a Wi-Fi.
All right, and then that's going to be equal to, now the tricky part. This is the hardest part about this problem, is just setting it up. I want to make x be my number of girls. Okay? So if x is the number of girls, then that would correspond to the 45%, because remember it's 45% girls. So that means that x is on top over here. And then on the bottom, the 100 represents the total percent of all students. So that's the boys and the girls combined. Okay. So I know I have 11 boys, but I don't know how many girls I have here. All I know is I'm calling the number of girls to be x. Okay, so if I want to know the total, I would have to do like 11 plus the x. Or if you wrote it as x plus 11, of course, that's the same thing. All right, now that we've gotten to this point, we can go ahead and we can solve from here. So let's go ahead and actually solve from here. So that means cross multiply. Well, the 100 times x,
100x.
that part's easy, right? Yeah, 100x. Remember, that is equal to
45x.
Now we cross multiply this way. Now this is the part that sometimes can throw people off. Remember that you have to multiply the 45 by both the 11 and the x. Okay, so make sure you're actually multiplying by both. So 45 times 11 gives me 495. And then 45 times x, well, that's just 45x. And now we solve the equation from there. All right, and so we end up getting a final answer here once we work out that algebra of x equals 9. So there's a total of 9 girls then in this class. All right, so we're taking a look at how to solve these. Well, actually not solve them. It says evaluate. When you see the word evaluate, do you already have in your mind an idea of what your answer is going to look like?
Yes. Kinda.
I hope so. Whenever you see that word evaluate, basically what it says is it means to figure out what it equals. Which means then that your answer is going to be just a number. Whenever it says evaluate, it's saying figure out what number this equals. Okay, so then in this case, what number does it equal? Notice the first thing we have to do is we need to take what x equals and plug that in for x. And yes, actually write these steps out. And if you write these steps out, it's going to help you keep everything straight. Now, the key to doing this problem correctly is order of operations. Okay, so order of operations says we should do what first?
Parentheses.
Yep, parentheses. So that means the stuff inside the parentheses. In this case,
1 plus 2 is 3.
that is the 1 plus 2. So that ends up giving us 3. Now, notice we got now 5 minus 3 parentheses 3. When I see this 3 parentheses 3, what am I really doing to the two 3's?
Multiplying.
We're multiplying them. So that means that I have to now decide again, what do I do next? Because there's both subtraction and there's multiplication here. Which one happens first?
Multiplying.
Multiplication. So next up I'm doing 3 times 3, which gives me the 9. Now all that's left is subtraction, so now I can actually do the subtraction. And so yes, we do get a final answer of negative 4. All right, now we go on to the second problem. And again, our first step is the same. I know what x equals, so plug that in for x. So I got 5 times 2 cubed. There's 2 different operations going on. There's this multiplication right here, and there's also the exponent right here. Which comes first, multiplication or exponent?
Exponent.
Exponent. So I got to do that exponent first. Now that means doing 2 cubed. I want to make sure that you remember what 2 cubed means, because you shouldn't even need your calculator for it. Because 2 cubed means 2 times itself 3 times. Well, what's 2 times 2?
3.
4. And if I multiply that by the other 2, that gives me... Alright, so I now have 5 times 8. Now I only have one operation left, just the multiplication, so certainly that's going to be the next thing I do. 4 times 8.
40.
That gives me 40. Okay, we're going to continue that theme here with these two problems. These are very similar to the last set. In fact, they're almost the same. The thing is that they look different. Alright, so then for that first one, I know that f of x equals 5 to the x plus 3. And that says find f parentheses 2. Remember we read that as f of 2. What that means, I'm bringing you back to the function notation, which is what this is all about here, that f parentheses, function notation, is it's telling us that x is normally in the parentheses. Now the 2 is in the parentheses. So it's telling me to take the 2 and put it in for x. It's just saying it in a different way. And I'm wanting you to get used to seeing it both ways, so you can handle it both ways. So now f of 2 equals 5 squared plus 3. On the left-hand side, remember that the f of 2, f parentheses 2, it does not mean f times 2. It is just a notation thing. Our final answer will still say f of 2 equals. It's just a matter of what does it equal. So go ahead and figure out, what does 5 squared plus 3 give us? Alright, so when doing that, the first thing I do is the exponent, because exponents come before addition, and then I can go ahead and do the adding. So you should get a final answer here of 28. And notice how I say my answer. F of 2 equals 28. I keep that f of 2 equals on the left-hand side as I work it down. We're going to do the same thing on the second. Write down the second problem if you haven't yet. And we're going to work that one through. But doing so, it looks a little bit different. That minus 4. Notice that minus 4 is small, like the x is small. It is raised, like the x is raised. You have to kind of look carefully at some of these problems, but in this case, that minus 4 is in the exponent. If I wanted to put parentheses here to try to clarify the way that this actually looks, it would be around the x minus 4. It is 10 to the power of that whole x minus 4. But there aren't parentheses, and we're still going to have to be able to deal with it appropriately. So, let's go ahead and start working through it. What is our first step?
Parentheses.
Plug in the 7. Let's plug that in first. And now, this is where it can be a little bit tricky though, because we look at it and we say, okay, first thing in my order of operation is parentheses. I don't see any parentheses, so next thing is exponent. Does that mean I do 10 to the 7th? No.
No.
Because since that whole 7 minus 4 is written all in the exponent, it is the same thing as putting parentheses around it. This is where math can be a little bit tricky, because it's assumed to be there. Those parentheses are assumed to be there. So I actually have to do the stuff inside of that exponent before I actually raise 10 to the power. Because both of those numbers, the 7 and the 4, are in the exponent. So I have to do them both. So let's go ahead and do the 7 minus 4 next. So what we're really figuring out in order to solve this is 10 cubed. And again, this is actually something you can do without your calculator. And I want to make sure you know how and why, because it's actually really easy to do without your calculator. 10 cubed equals 10 times 10 times 10. Okay, well, what does 10 times 10 equal?
1 times 1 is 1.
100. And what's 100 times 10? And if you don't know, the trick is that anytime you multiply something by 10,
Add another 0. It's 1,000.
you add a 0 onto the end of it. So yes, it is 1,000. And so f of 7 equals 1,000. That's the way your work and your answer should look. Make sure you got that right on your paper. All right, so now we're going to be working on these problems. So again, a slightly different look of the same kind of theme. So on that first one, what do you think we should do first?
Plug it in.
Yep, let's plug it in. Notice we're looking for f of 9 here. So the very first thing I'm going to do then is I'm going to plug the 9 in for x. Alright, so that's what we do first. We plug 9 in for x. Alright, now that I've done that, now it's a matter of order of operations from there. Alright, so order of operations then, at this point, would say to do the stuff inside the parentheses first, which we can do. So I'm going to go ahead and do the 1 plus the 0.5.
It's 1.5.
Yeah, that one's easy, right? 1.5? Didn't need a calculator for that yet. Although, I'm afraid with this one we may end up needing one before we're done. So we now have f of 9 equals 10 times 1.5 to the 9th. Alright, which number am I going to be working with next? The 10 or the 9?
1.5.
Because one of them I got to deal with the 1.5.
You got to do the 9.
It's got to be the 9 first. Because remember that when we look at this, what I'm really seeing is 10 times 1.5 to the power of 9. So that 9, it's the exponent. We got to do the exponent first. So can you do 1.5 to the 9th in your head?
Yeah, 13.5.
Probably not.
13.5.
So this is calculator time now. So break out the calculator. Let's do 1.5 to the power of 9. All right, now when you do 1.5 to the power of 9, you get 38.44 and then a whole bunch of more numbers. I want to talk some detail here for you, because we're going to be seeing a lot more problems like this that come up with these messy decimals in the middle. Notice how I wrote it. I wrote 38.44 and then 3 dots. Those 3 dots are showing that it just continues on, because I don't want to actually round my numbers here in the middle and just work on those. Because if I just did what I see there, 10 times 38.44, I would get an answer here of 384.4. And that's all I could give. I wouldn't know that there's actually more numbers out here that I could include if I wanted to. And you know, I kind of like to give a second decimal in my answer. So instead, what you do is you keep that whole decimal sitting on your calculator. You don't press clear. And as it's sitting there on your calculator, you then just say times 10. And when you do that then, it then gives you an actual answer here. So f of 9 equals 384.43. Now, again, that technically is a rounded answer there, but at least I waited until the end to round it. Now, I'm going to go slightly math teacher on you here for a moment, get a little detail-y. Technically, f of 9 does not equal 384.3. Technically, that's an approximation. If you want to be as detailed as showing that this is an approximation, you draw a wavy equal sign. That means it's approximately equal to that. Now for the second problem here, we're going to again approach it kind of the same way. In this case though, notice I changed something up on you. It's no longer f and x. It's now a and t. What's that change? It just changes the letters we write. That's all it changes. We still handle all the mathematics the same way. So, my first line of work. I need to take the 30 and plug it in. Just notice it's not an x in the parentheses, it's a t in the parentheses. So, it's going to be a of 30 equals, and then anywhere where I see a t, I'm going to replace it with the 30. So 85, 1 plus 0.05 to the power of, there's a t, so power of 30. So, when doing this problem now, we got to think order of operations still, and you still have to be careful about that order. I have to do the stuff inside the parentheses first, remember. So this is going to be 85 times 1.05 to the 30th. Next up, I got to do the 1.05 to the 30. When doing that, knowing how to do this on your calculator is obviously a big help. On the phones, turn it sideways to find the button that you're looking for. Most calculators, the button's going to look something like this. X to the Y, Y to the X, something like that in your calculator. And when you use that button, what you're going to type in is you're going to type in 1.05, press the button, and then press 30, and then equals. When you do that, if you've done it correctly here, you should get an answer that's about 4.32, and then a whole bunch more decimals that go on.
Yes.
Now remember, I'm keeping that number sitting up on my calculator at this point. I'm not pressing clear. Why would I press clear? I'd have to retype it in. It's even more work even if I do round it.
What the heck?
Why do I want to put in more work to get a worse answer?
I got 367.
Now I can actually do the multiplication. So with this number sitting up on my calculator, I now just press times 85, and that gives me then 367. I'm going to give 2 decimals again, just because I feel like it.
I did before.
Now, I chose to round this one to the second decimal. So that gave me 0.37. If you had not used this number sitting on your calculator, the whole thing, if you just typed in 4.32 times 85, you would not get the same answer. You get what we call rounding error. Because if we round in the middle, it gives us an error in our answer. So that's why you always want to use that exact value that's given in your calculator. Alright, so in the last set of problems, you had an equation that looked a lot like this one, right? It was an A of t. That actually is commonly used in some of these financial types of calculations, and so I've actually purposely thrown that in so that when we then see it in context, it's not going to throw you off so much. So, we know that we have some situation here, a stock is increasing according to this equation. Yes, this is the type of equation that would represent that. And we want to figure out what the value of the stock will be after t equals 10 years. What do you suppose the first thing I'm going to write down in terms of work is? What am I going to want to do first with all this stuff?
You want to find the parentheses.
And so the first thing, before you can even do the math, is know what math you're doing. That means plug the t equals 10 in for t. Then once we've done that, then we can worry about actually going through the actual process, going through the math, the order of operations, and all that stuff. In this particular one, though, notice what the context of the problem told us about. It told us that a stock is increasing in value. And so that already tells me, I got to read into it a little bit here. This is where the extra work of the actual word problem comes into play. I have to read into it here that this value that I'm finding is money. And if we're talking money, we should always round to the nearest cent. And so in the previous problem, I chose to round to 2 decimal places out of just a choice I made. In this case, I rounded to 2 decimal places because I'm talking about money, and if I'm talking about money, I got to round to the nearest cent, which is 2 decimals. So anytime you see that in context now, you got to see, okay, well, if I'm talking about money, it's got to be rounded there to 2 decimal places.
And then